All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you all for coming out to our last public lecture of the year. We appreciate each and every one of you that have come out to support our all of our great speakers that we've had this year, and we hope to have you all again next year in January and February. But for tonight, just as a reminder, we have our exit signs that are highlighted in green around the room in case of an emergency. And then another reminder, if y'all don't know where the restrooms are going to be through these doors down the hallway to the left, or you can use the back doors down the hallway to the left. So just a little reminder. And then we also, lastly, to record so at the end of each presentation, we're going to need to pass this around so that we can record your questions through this for our recording that we're going to submit to YouTube. So I'm going to come around and pass this for y'all to ask your questions. All right, well, I'm going to pass the mic over to our speakers tonight, and they will introduce themselves.
Can you hear me okay in the back? I'm Randy Bissell. This is my friend Jim Maloney, and we're going to give the presentation tonight. We've never done this together, have we? No, right? So y'all are guinea pigs, and just by way of introduction, I'm Randy. I'm the Randy guy. Both of us need to replace our pictures. I realize that. But it's nice to think of us in those days, right? I still think of myself like that. You do? Yeah. Well, your wife says it's different than that. But anyway, the point is that I'm a geologist, and that's my background, and I'm also a Texas master naturalist. And so people ask, well, where is the intersection between geology and history? And so my mantra is always this: that geology and landscape is always a character in Texas history. And it's very often the main character because Texas is about the frontier. Okay. But I've been a geologist for about 42 years. I went through college, went to work for a small oil company called Exxon, and then left them and became an independent in South Texas. And then for the last 10 years, I've been affiliated with both a working stiff and volunteering and teaching some at the university. So I teach geology and historical earth history and paleontology, which is earth history too. So I do that at the university, and I write occasionally. And so that's my intersection with Jim. Jim and I have collaborated on a couple of different presentations and talks, and this is just the latest one. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim. He'll tell you his background.
And I'm Jim Maloney. I am not a native Texan. I grew up in Ohio and got here in 1981. I am in the gas compressor business, so the history is not a profession. It's an avocation. I got to it by way of I'm a collector, and I collect things, and I started collecting old postcards of the area, from the wildlife refuge to Sarita and everything in between. And that was 37 years ago. So over those years, I've had to learn a lot of history because the postcards are history. And so years ago, almost 20 years ago, 1907. No, 2007, we started working on our first book, the 1919 hurricane. And so since then, I have published with myself and with some other authors, 19 books on South Texas history. And I collect that stuff. And that's how we got together on this project. Randy was in my office, and he saw a photograph or a painting on the wall and started looking at it and asking me about what I knew about it and so forth. And you'll see it in a while. And the next thing I know, he's working on this talk. And so he recruited me to do the history side of it. And so that's what we're going to do. So here you go.
Okay, so the way things are going to go, if in the perfect world, is that I'm going to talk about the natural history of Corpus Christi Pass, what it is, where it was, and what forces geologically drive the presence of the natural passes here along the island chain, Padre, Mustang, and St. Joe. Now, the first thing I'm going to encourage you to do, because I know all you guys are smart and all you guys been down here and you've driven down here and you've seen all the signs and historical signs and places. I'm going to ask you to forget everything you know about what something is called. Because the sign that says Corpus Christi Pass on 361 at the park is not the Corpus Christi Pass we're going to talk about. The place of Port Aransas that we're sitting was not called Port Aransas. Okay? The Aransas Pass wasn't what it is today. It didn't go from Corpus Christi to the ocean. And we'll talk about, so you have to kind of, if I want to eliminate confusion, and let's recognize that people have changed a lot of names and moved a lot of sand around in the last 150 years. And so if you force me to reconcile the present to the past out of my slow disclosure, we're apt to all get confused. And you know what happens when we get confused? Our children show up and ask us if we took our medicines. So yes, I took my medicine today, and just bear with me on the name change. Now, if you get confused at any point, don't call your kids. Raise your hand and we'll point out any confusion, because I've intentionally confused the slides with north, okay? And so watch for the north arrow because it moves around the entire compass azimuth, because I tried to orient the pictures in a way they fit on the slides. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the past in history, the prehistory before the 1900s. What did the original Corpus Christi Pass look like? And then we're going to bring you to Jim's going to pick up from that and talk about the affair at Padre Island. And that is this brief Civil War battle that occurred in the body of water known at the time as the Corpus Christi Pass. Okay? And he'll take you through the history and the documentation and some of the nuance of the two paintings that were made of that battle that nobody knows about. And then I'm going to take you, after we finish that, we all have a thorough understanding of what happened at the affair at Padre Island. And maybe even we'll touch on why it was called the affair. I mean, to call a battle that you lost the affair at Padre Island is a little bit of an attempt to gloss over how awful it was. And then I'll look at today's landscape and today's landmarks at the end, and we're going to talk about, well, where, if I want to go see where this battle happened, where do I go? And we're going to talk about where that pass is today. And I'll give you a clue. It's a lot harder to find than you'd think. And we'll talk about the why. Okay, everybody got their seatbelts fastened? Tray tables up? Okay, if the mask drops down, be sure and put it on yourself before the person next to you. Okay? Now, the natural Corpus Christi Pass. All right, so the picture on the left is two maps of the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, the Gulf of Mexico, and the fact, the data shows that we have a very strong longshore current continually acting along our coast. As a matter of fact, it's probably one of the greatest influences we have on our coastal geology. More sand moves up and down the coast from the river than from the rivers out to the coast. And it's a funny deal because on the upper one, in the summertime, the current flows from south to north along our coast, bringing sediment from the Rio Grande and the rivers down in Mexico up along our Texas coast. And in the wintertime, when we have the northeasterly and northerly winds, that reverses itself. And so in the wintertime, I like to say, in the summertime, we get Caribbean trash on our beach. And in the wintertime, we get Louisiana trash on our beach. And that's not disparaging about the people that show up. But the point is that we have this extremely strong longshore current that, in the absence of human beings, is a principal shaper of our coast. And believe it or not, it's a pretty wild story. Now, everybody understand that figure, right? And it changes. And so one of the cool things on a different talk is the area just to the south of us is actually the convergence zone of both of those currents. And so you ever wonder why there's big shells at Big Shell? Is because that's where all the energy is. That's where all the coarse grain material gets dumped. That's the convergence of the two currents. And then they have this tug of war through the season of where is that locus point? And that shapes a lot of Padre, Mustang, and St. Joe Island. Well, as an example, on the right, I have a figure from the 1880s. Now, north is to your right. Okay, so I've turned it on its side. And it shows the original Aransas Pass. In 1878, the Aransas Pass actually came out next to a spit, and that pass went north to Rockport. The pass went to the place called Rockport. Okay? And really interestingly, these other little dash lines are different occupations of the pass in the years around 1878. So in 1863, the pass was right here across St. Joe Island. And as Jim points out, that makes sense that the lighthouse was at the opening of the pass. Now, today, that lighthouse is way the heck up Harbor Island. That doesn't make sense. Well, it made sense when they built the lighthouse. But as Jim and I were talking in the car, he said they suggested that the lighthouse probably ought to be on a barge. And you know what? They were smarter than we give them credit for, because this pass has moved around. Now, the entrance to Corpus Christi Bay was actually through this narrow called Turtle Cove. It was extremely shallow and unreliable. So the notion that somehow Corpus Christi Port was connected to the ocean through the Aransas Pass, that's not true in 1880. That's all man-made. And so when we look out here at the Aransas Pass, it's virtually all man-made. It's all been resculpted. And so think about, I mean, these are hundreds or thousands of feet of movement of that channel in just a few years. And so these natural passes were notoriously dynamic, not reliable and stable. That makes everybody with me on that. Any questions? All right. Now, this is a map from 1890 of the hereto failed idea of Ropesport or Ropeport right in the middle of Mustang Island. Ropeport never happened. They did dig the channel, but it closed up as quickly as they built it. Rope ended up coming up here, right, and selling a bunch of real estate and going broke, right? And in Corpus Christi also. So Rope was quite the entrepreneur, and his idea of a railroad and all that never happened. But what's really cool about this map is it shows that the original Corpus Christi Pass, again, north is in that direction. So the original Corpus Christi Pass went from south to north along the backside of Mustang Island from Whitecap Beach to just south of Shamrock Island on the backside of the island. It didn't cut across the island. It was along the island, being shaped by those strong longshore currents. Similarly, the channel up here went from the Aransas Pass all the way to Rockport. And there were early attempts to dredge another entrance into Corpus Christi Bay. So the factors that were going on back in the 1800s were, one, the Nueces River was quite a bit different than the pathetic, drippy stream we have today. Before there were dams, before there was so much agriculture, before all the water in the watershed got moved, used up, the river actually flowed fresh water. It was a reliable source of fresh water for the city, or an unreliable source, because they had to barrel water from the Nueces River to the Corpus Christi town site. Out here in the front, we had Mustang Island, which was this big, fat, robust island sitting out in the mouth of Corpus Christi Bay. And with the river flow into the bay and the tidal flow through the passes, we would end up with this bulge of water in the bay. So where does the bulge of water go in and out of the bay? It goes in and out the natural passes, one of which is this Corpus Christi Pass, which we already talked about, went from south to north. And then the other was the Aransas Passes. The main pass went from the entrance up to Rockport, but there was this secondary minor pass, just like there was a secondary minor pass down here too, but those were just really dealing with the water and the tide waters in the laguna. But the island itself was this big, fat, robust island, and you'll notice that the passes formed logically on either side of the big slug of sand. That makes sense? I mean, this is just nature doing its thing. Before we and Mr. Ropes came along with our big plans. Now, this is a zoom in. Oh, I was going to go back and say one more thing. Also, I just want to point out that where did people build their most vulnerable civilizations? Oh, they built it at the weak point of the island at either end. Just if you're interested in real estate, let me show you some real estate. All right. So this is a zoom in of a GLO map or coastal survey map from the mid 1800s of the Corpus Christi Pass. And notice that north is to our right. Here's the entrance of Corpus Christi Bay. Here is the backside of Mustang Island. And all of these little dots represent soundings of the legitimate pass. They had to sound the pass all the time to establish its navigability. In other words, Corpus Christi during the Civil War was trying to get goods and services out to England and France, and then we're trying to receive material. The only way to get it to Corpus Christi was through the Corpus Christi Pass. And so it was a strategic waterway. And it had to be sounded all the time because the south end of the pass was undergoing all of those changes that we saw from the detailed map of Aransas Pass. And so this area that we now call Whitecap Beach is actually on ancestral Mustang Island. Now just let that soak in for a second. Okay? But Whitecap Beach was prone to the same kind of avulsion and change of the channels that we saw at Aransas Pass. And the channel itself was migrating to the south. And so the cut bank or the cliff face was on Padre Island. And the plains, these were flat plains here on Whitecap Beach. This is going to become really important here in a second. Now, the Confederates held Corpus Christi in 1862 after a siege. The Union tried to take them back. And the Union occupied a blockade in the Gulf of Mexico of all Gulf of Mexico ports. From Baghdad to Virginia to Norfolk, the Union had a blockade to prevent trade with France and England to shut down the cotton trade and all the money trade. And they were very effective. They had a lot of ships, and they were very successful at their blockade. The skirmish that we're going to talk about occurred right here in the original Corpus Christi Pass. And then at the end, we'll talk about, well, if I want to go and put my hands on the site, where do we think that is today? Now, this is the last slide I'm going to talk from, and I'm going to pass it to Jim. And we're doing okay on time. But the story is going to unfold. This is a map where north is up. And so we're looking at the south to north Corpus Christi Pass right here. And so a Confederate ship, and Jim will speak to this, the Queen of the Bay came down the channel, and the Union bark, which is a substantial ship, it was working the Gulf of Mexico out here. It had sent 2 of its launches, its small boats, into the pass or into the Bay Area prior to the skirmish. But the skirmish occurred with the Confederates on the south side or on the Padre side of the pass, and the Union soldiers on the Mustang. So how do you remember? The Rebs were south and the Union was north. That's how it worked out. And that's how it worked out that day. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim. Here's the big forward button, and there's the laser zapper.
Okay. So Corpus Christi in the Civil War was not much of a town, but it was an important port in that goods and services could go out of the Corpus Christi Pass, goods mostly. They were trying to smuggle cotton to Europe. So the Union made sure to blockade the city. They attacked. Okay, let's go. What do I do now? Yeah, but I'm trying to turn it and it's not going. Little button. Ah. Nope. Okay, I see. That slides out of place to me. Anyway. So February of 1861, Texas joined the Confederacy. Corpus Christi voted 3 or 4 to 1 to join the Confederacy, even though there were only about 60 slaves in the whole area. And then in July of 1861, the Union started blockading the Confederate ports all around the country because Lincoln decided that if they couldn't get any ammunition and munitions into the Confederacy, they could end the war quickly. So as a converse to that, this is off the subject, but there was a cotton road that ran from where Columbus, Texas is today to Mexico that they hauled cotton down there by wagon because once it got across the Rio Grande to Mexico, it became Mexican cotton, and the Mexicans could ship the cotton out the Gulf of Mexico through the town of Baghdad in Mexico. So there was a lot of trade of cotton in the area, but nothing could get out of the passes. So in August of 1862, the Union tried to take Corpus Christi. They bombarded the city for a couple days, but were unsuccessful. And then in December of 1862, our battle took place. So let's go to that. This is crazy. This is a little minor skirmish. There were a total of less than 30 people or so involved in this battle. And yet there are 2 paintings. And the reason is because there was another battle going on. There was no money in Corpus Christi or in our area at all. And we had 2 guys who had some talent in being an artist. They were not artists professionally. But at the top, we have a painting by David Gamble of our battle, and at the bottom by Thomas Noakes. Gamble was a house painter, but he obviously had some painting background. Noakes was an English immigrant who could do anything, but he again he painted for fun. But they found in the Battle of Corpus Christi, both of these guys were in the Battle of Corpus Christi and painted paintings of that battle, and they were able to sell several copies of each painting. So they thought, here's a way to make some money. So when this second battle happened out here in Corpus Christi Pass, they both decided to paint it, even though neither of them were there. But they talked to all the guys who were there and painted the paintings. So the top picture, do we go to bigger pictures or not? So here's the top painting, the Gamble painting, David Gamble. By the way, David Gamble died about 10 years after the Civil War from drinking methanol because he was an alcoholic and he couldn't find any alcohol, so he drank methanol, and that's a terrible way to go. But this is the Gamble painting, and it shows several things. First of all, there is a Union launch in the bay, or the Union, I think it was the Arthur, and that's where we think that these launches came from, these two Union boats. And they came around through the pass and hit on the backside because they had heard that the Confederate boat, the Queen of the Bay, was going to be trying to go out the channel. So the Confederate boat went up the channel on December the 6th and realized that this bar out here, there's a sandbar at the mouth of the channel, and it was too shallow, the boat could not get out. So on December 7th, they decided to go back down the channel and go back to Corpus Christi. In the meantime, the Confederates on December 7th decided they were going to capture this boat as a prize. And so they came from Corpus Christi Bay up the channel to trap the Queen of the Bay. And so this is the Noakes painting, the Thomas Noakes painting, same battle. Here you have the Queen of the Bay. The Confederates had beached the Queen of the Bay and waded up and got on one of the sand dunes on the Padre Island side, which were 20 to 30 feet high, and started firing down at the Union ships, Union boats that were trying to capture it. And in the Confederate boat, there were 3 seamen and 7 sharpshooters from Seguin. Yes, sir. So it's going this way. Whoops.
And away from the bullets. So they have two significant tactical disadvantages. One is the elevation of the Confederate soldiers, and second is they have 3. But the second is having to deal with the wind, the contrary wind, as they're trying to get across the pass to safety on Mustang Island.
So we have 7 sharpshooters right here. We have several more guys. There's 2 guys that aren't even involved. They're just spectators. But a total of 7 men were shooting at the sitting ducks in these boats. And they killed 2 of them and wounded another. And with that, the Union soldiers decided to retreat, and they rowed across to Mustang Island, which was shallow, and got out and thought they were safe. It was about 1,000 yards. And one of the Confederates was able to shoot one of the Union guys from 1,000 yards and kill him. So we ended up with 3 guys killed and 1 wounded that were Yankee soldiers, and Confederates had no wounds whatsoever. So the Yankees then hightailed it north. They walked 20 miles up to Port Aransas, and the Confederates captured the 2 launches from the Union. Why is that not working? The 2 launches, and they recovered the three bodies. One guy was wounded, and 2 were killed, and took them back to Corpus Christi. And Confederates won the battle, but it wasn't really much of a battle, and really didn't have much to do with the war. But the interesting thing is that there were 2 paintings done of this minor little skirmish. As far as I know, 2 of them were sold. Gamble was a bit of an entrepreneur. We'll go back to him. Whoops, wrong way. Uh-oh. Gamble was an entrepreneur, and he'd sold 3 or 4 paintings in Corpus Christi of the Battle of Corpus Christi. So he decided to have a border printed on his painting. So it has a poem up here and a list of the people that were part of the battle and the title down below. And so he only had to paint the center of the boat. And he was planning on selling 3 or 4. As far as I know, he only sold 1, and I own it. I bought it at auction about 3 years ago and did not know it existed until I saw it at auction. The other one, this painting, was done by Noakes. He painted the entire thing, and we don't see it, but down below, it says painted by Thomas Noakes, but it looks like a modern day print. He probably had never seen a painting, and so he had only seen lithographic prints And so he thought that the painting ought to look like a print. So he did that. That painting was eventually ended up in the hands of Charles Butt, who owns HEB. And a couple years ago, I was at a party at Mr. Butt's house and saw this painting on the wall and remembered it. So when we did Murphy Givens and I did a book on Thomas Noakes' diary, and we got Charles Butt to donate a copy of his painting that we used on the cover of the book. So that's how we got that picture. So the poem by Adam Puhle was a taunting poem, and I'm not going to read it all, but I'll read the parts in yellow. 10 men in a boat, but 7 of them armed. You pursued them with 22 stupid jackasses. You thought that the Rebs would be sorely alarmed, yet came within gunshot. They gave you a blizzard. You pulled to Mustang and away from all danger. 1,000 yards distant, you stood up to fight. But a ball from a Mini in the hands of a Ranger cap swiveled another, and you took to flight. 3 Yankees, 1 wounded, 2 dead. And then they said, poor tools of Abe Lincoln who are invading Texas, we will never submit to your Northerners' rule. You can never conquer, you can only vex us, but we'll whoop you as surely as my name's Adam Puhle. So we think Adam wrote that, but we have no idea who Adam is. And so that is the story of the capture of the Union launches and the Battle of Corpus Christi. And so the names of the wounded and killed are A.H. Reynolds. He was an ensign. 2 wounds on his right side, badly wounded. Thomas Mullman in his right arm, slightly. John Gacy, landsman in his breast, severely. And William Nelson, landsman, killed, shot through the head. And Benjamin P. Cohen, landsman, shot through the breast. And Peter Baxter, a refugee from Corpus Christi and a native of the city of Perth, who was killed. So 3 killed, 3 wounded. It was sort of like a duck shoot. So, back to you. So now we're going to talk about where we are. But there's...
Oh, and you can get a picture of those QR codes if you're interested in getting a painting or the book about Thomas Noakes. They're both available. You know how to do that with your smartphone, take a picture and QR code it. Or you can send it to the
Like I told you, again.
Yeah, well, Copenhagen Bay Press and Oasis Press.
Yeah. So we, Thomas Noakes.
That's why we know a lot about the Civil War in Corpus Christi. And so the painting was put on the cover of his diary. And my friends at Copenhagen Bay Press have, what have I done? I'll give it back.
All right, let me just go back and say one thing about the remembrance. Both of the armies were required to report shortly after the incident. The Union Army and the Confederate Army both wrote accounts. Both of those were published many years ago in the Island Moon, the newspaper here in Port Aransas. And so we can read those original accounts. Of course, each one is from the perspective of the Union and the Confederate. So they're not exactly the same. But somewhere in the middle, we do end up with between the paintings and the written accounts, we end up with a fairly good picture of what happened that December morning. And what was it? There was something else I was going to say about that. Well, anyway, it'll come to mind. If your QR code thing doesn't work or you don't want to do that, and if you're interested, you can talk to us afterwards, and we can get you clued in on where that you can get these resources. All right, so let's go look for Corpus Christi Pass today. All right, so here's a map from the 1800s. North is up, conveniently, and the route of the original Corpus Christi Pass, it's skirted along the backside of Mustang Island from Whitecap Beach all the way to just south of Shamrock Island. Y'all know where I'm talking about, right? All right. So if we look at the history as it's unfolded today, the exchange of water that at one time was accomplished through this natural pass is now accomplished from the intercoastal waterway and the connection to the dredged Packery Channel, which exits out straight across the island. So Packery Channel is not a natural feature. The intercoastal waterway is not a natural feature, but the man-made features accomplish the movement of water between the bay and the Gulf. Because the water has moved in this direction or is now relying on this, the old pass itself has no natural utility. And so it's going to sand up and fill up. It's going to disappear in time. Now, somebody asked me at a previous talk, well, what happens 1,000 years from now? And I said, well, if Elon Musk abandons all this 1,000 years from now, then, you know, the natural orientation of our Gulf passes are going to be north and south behind the island. That's the way the Corpus Christi Pass was. That's the way the Aransas Pass was. And if you show up at the UT Bays and Estuaries meeting in a couple of months, you're going to hear me talk about the missing pass down on Padre Island. It again goes north-south, but it's all filled in. So in the pre-20th century, we had the natural blue, light blue tidal pass. In the earliest 20th century, they started playing around with trying to make a more efficient connection, but they always sanded up. And then in the mid-20th century, once the intercoastal waterway was well established, about 1959, we started to think more about opening up a pass. And by 2000, we got it all funded, and they brought in the Packery Channel right across this place right here. And the Corpus Christi Pass began to get filled in and abandoned. Just as a point of interest, that if you ever go to Whitecap Beach, down there where the DoubleTree is and the seawall, if you're north of Whitecap Road, you're on Old Mustang Island. Kind of a trick your grandkids or kids with that one. Hey, which island are we on? Oh, we're on Padre Island. Don't you know Padre Island starts at the south side of Packery Channel? And you can say, no, that's not right. That's not right. This geologist showed me that Whitecap Beach is actually Mustang Island. And south of Whitecap Boulevard, yeah, there's your Padre Island. But the original Mustang Island, we got a little island of unnamed area right there. All right, so what happened to the old pass? Well, every storm between then and now has washed sediment. These are great pictures from Richard Watson. Richard, you here? No, Richard lives up here in Port Aransas, and he's a geologist and a pilot. And he used to fly around and take pictures of what happened to the island after the hurricanes. So after Hurricane Alice in '74, all this sediment on the front side got pushed through to the backside, filling in the historic old pass at Newport Pass. This is what's called Corpus Christi Pass right here. But you can see after Beulah, the 361 was completely washed out, and all of this sediment got pushed through and filled in the old Corpus Christi Pass. And then here's a couple of different passes, the Newport Pass and Corpus Christi Pass in Beulah, Newport Pass, and they're all just pushing sediment and sand back into this slough that's really all that's left of the historical Corpus Christi Pass. So the answer is the pass has been lost to time and history and sedimentation, and it's been replaced as a waterway by the intersection of the intercoastal waterway and the new Packery Channel. And to some extent, the new Port Aransas, because that vital water, tidal water exchange, I don't know if you've noticed this when you cross the ferry, but sometimes that water is ripping through the Aransas Pass. And I don't know if you've driven over Packery Channel on 361 on tide change, but that water is ripping through Packery Channel. And so those man-made waterways have replaced the necessity for the natural waterways that occurred along the backside of the islands. One of the tools that we have as geoscientists is this new, relatively new technology called LIDAR. How many of you are familiar with LIDAR? Not many. So imagine a photograph that when I take your picture, let's say I take your picture, you know my photo's made of pixels, right? Well, imagine if for every pixel, I measured the distance from my camera to whatever was providing the color. Then I would have a full 3D resolution of you, right? I would just have the color of the pixel, but I'd have the distance from my eye to whatever was reflecting the light back. So using satellites and air photos and drones, using LIDAR, we can get exceptional detail about topography and little textures of the ground surface. And in about 2021, there was a big flight of LIDAR over the Texas coast, and the Hart Research Institute, which we all pay to support at the university, they created a great LIDAR model. And that's what this is. This is just a LIDAR image of a couple of features, a zoom in. Here's Zahn Road, if you've ever been on. Here's 361. Here's Packery Channel. And here's Newport Pass, that big flat area at Newport Pass. And here's the little Newport Pass channel. And the old Corpus Christi Pass ran behind the island. And so little vestiges of the pass show up on the LIDAR. It's kind of cool. It's like a forensic tool. Where did the pass go, Daddy? Well, it's right there. You just have to, it's that pond and that pond and that pond. And as we were driving up here tonight, I was saying, there it is, Jim. And Jim would wake up and go, oh, all right. No, there it is, Jim. But it scoots up along here, and it doesn't cross the road until you get north of the Methodist Church, okay? And so that old pass, and it's just been filled over and over again with sediment that's getting pushed across. But this LIDAR is a really cool tool. All right, so north is to the left this time. And if we look at this map, there's the old route of the original historic Corpus Christi Pass hugging the backside of the island. And so let's take our LIDAR image, our cool LIDAR image, and let's slip it underneath this map. That's kind of cool. And now let's look at Newport Pass and Packery Channel and Whitecap Beach. Where are those reconciling the modern LIDAR image with the old 1850s, 60s map? What you find out is here's that little dangle of Mustang Island that's not Mustang Island anymore because Packery Channel cuts right across that plain, that beach plain, okay? And so for modern convenience, we want to make things as short as we can, right? So we're just going to cut straight across and forget the old channel. Except don't forget the old channel, because that area that's called Padre Lakes, okay? Padre Lakes is actually a segment of the old Corpus Christi Pass. It ought not be called Padre Lakes. It should be called Old Corpus Christi Pass. And Whitecap Beach, Whitecap Road, comes right out across right here, comes right across. And so it's in about the mouth of the old pass. So the next thing we're going to do, again, I just highlighted the old pass. We're going to look at photographs of different places. We're going to look at the battle site. I'm going to show you some picture of the battle site as best as I can estimate where it was. We're going to look at the bridge over Packery Channel and talk about some of the vestiges or the remnants of the old pass. And then we're going to come up here and look behind the Methodist Church. There's an oil tank battery there that, being in the oil business, I felt the liberty to trespass and climb upon to get a good photograph. And y'all forgive me for that. I am a geologist and a professional. I wouldn't suggest that any of you cross the orange barrier, but my wife, who's also a geologist, will tell you that we often cross. Orange barriers are an invitation to a geologist to go see what's going on. And so we'll go behind the church. All right, and then what else? I want to say nothing else. Any questions about this? You see why I told you to forget everything you knew about what something's called? because you'll just get confused. Yes.
So you don't think that Dead Man's Hole in there is originally part of maybe?
What is a dead man's hole? Well, don't Google that. Okay, where is dead man's hole? You come
Right
right
past the Crane Island to the east or Crane Island.
where? Out here?
You see where Crane Island is? The little hook.
Oh, there.
That's Crane Island, and that other white spot behind it is really where Dead Man's Hole is.
I think those are probably natural swales.
Look at his story. I didn't study Dead Man's Hole, and it's not on my map. So, but that's if you'd like to be a graduate student, I can get you a patient because we could get you on. That's a good research project. So I'm all for that. Also, the problem with LIDAR is LIDAR doesn't look below the water surface. That's a whole nother exercise to get original bathymetry. Well, you can't because LIDAR will just bounce off the water. It can't go. We have to use another method like seismic to map the bottom of the water. And there are maps of it though. And that's a great question.
When they were dredging. Well, a hole from when they're dredging.
Not there are swales and holes in the Laguna Madre. And some are oil and gas blowouts. There's some fine looking. There's a great blowout near Flower Bluff. You can see it. It's round. And it's got bubbles coming up from it. So pretty impressive. All right. So, yes.
Packer channel in the wrong place. It's a normal passing that's not to fill in, run the
Oh, that's a great question, Bill. Thank you for that.
Have y'all had Philippe talk to y'all yet? Because he's at the Conrad Blucher Institute for Coastal Studies. And Philippe has said, for one reason or another, where and how they put this Packery channel, it's kind of self-cleaning. The currents are strong enough to keep the channel itself cleaned out, but you still get this apron or this bar of sand that forms up on the mouth. And you remember last year they had the barge out there, and the barge was cleaning out the mouth, and the barge broke down, and then there was all the barge washed. That was not because they were having to dredge the channel itself. It was that bar. Those longshore currents are still bringing sediment. I mean, they try to stop those with those jetties that stick out. But all they do is build sand on one side and rob the other side. I mean, go out to this jetty. I mean, it's just right here. Stand at the end of the jetty. And you'll notice when you look up at St. Joe Island, the beach at St. Joe Island's back over there because the jetty itself has prevented longshore current from nourishing St. Joe's Island with sand from the south. All of our jetties, if you look at them on Google Earth, and I'm a geologist, and Google Earth is kind of my kind of porn, okay? I spend a lot of time looking at Google Earth, okay? Dawn has to come in and say, put that stuff up, Randy. That'll make you go blind, and I'll go, okay. But so if you'll notice, all of our jetties on the Texas coast are asymmetric. You can see where sand's accumulating on one side and being robbed on the other because the jetties are just a temporary solution to the longshore drift issue. They're not there to keep the channels open. They kind of do that, but really their function is to really slow down longshore currents. All right, that was great. How much time do I have? All right, yeah, this is the 2-hour talk, right? So down at the battle site. So if you want to go to the battle site, windward at Whitecap, because if you're at windward at Whitecap, you look to the south and you see a kind of a swale of a little bit of a wetland before you. And if you turn around and look at the other direction, you see that Lake Padre thing. And so this arm of Lake Padre is probably part of the original channel. And then to the south of Whitecap, it's just all been filled in by human development and windblown sand. Was probably a stretch of the original. I think, and the LIDAR matches that. So yeah, so that corner probably gives you the best perspective on where the battle occurred. Again, if you go to the bridge of 361, if you look, this is looking north. This is the man-made Packery Channel, and the old channel's really not here. It's over here to the right. On Zahn Road, if you look to the north, let me just this is looking that same position, but looking on the other side. So some small stretch of this part of Packery Channel may be the original pass, because there's the gateway into Lake Padre, which sits to the south. And so some little bit of Packery Channel may be a remnant. But then if you're on Zahn Road and you look to the north, 361's over here to the west. The beach is over here to the east. There are a series of little ponds that you'll see. Those are probably little bits of the original original Corpus Christi Pass that remain. And these are, birds love these. So if you're a bird watcher, it is amazing the variety of birds you'll see feeding in those ponds associated with the old channel. And yeah, the old channel would have headed up right here, and the Methodist Church is off there in the distance. So that's kind of the path of the old Corpus Christi Pass. And then finally, this is from behind the Methodist Church looking north. The Corpus Christi Pass would have been over here to my right, having just crossed 361. And all of this washover sediment are from these storm passes that have filled in the area behind the historical Corpus Christi Pass. So that's the summary. We talked about the natural pass in history. Jim talked about the affair at Padre Island and the Civil War battle, and then search of the past today. And so here's a sign that you won't find a sign. There is no sign at the location of the battle. Now, as a Southerner, I'm kind of offended by that. As a Northerner, I'm kind of offended by that. That there's no I grew up in Mississippi, and every battlefield has markers for both sides. And I've been to Shiloh, and I've been to Chattanooga. I've even been down to the Rio Grande Valley where the last battle of the Civil War was fought. Okay? And there's always a sign. There's no sign. So and I've got a buddy, and I was talking to Jim on the way up here, I've got a conspiracy to try to get a sign at that site to commemorate the skirmish, the history, and also recognize the loss, the people that gave their lives for the Union. It seems a shame to me that these people may be forgotten in history. And it upsets me that we're okay with that. Right? Are we going to remember for the people who died to protect the Union? And it really breaks my heart to think that we won't. And so I'm going to put Jim and myself, there's a professor out at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, we're going to start the sign project. Okay? And we'll raise the money to get it done. And we're dealing with a bureaucracy. But thank goodness it's not a federal bureaucracy. Because I don't know if you've heard, but Texas has got a lot of money in a rainy day fund. And but yeah, the Texas Historical Commission does, apparently their foundry, they lost their foundry. And so they lost their ability to make signs. So there's this huge backlog of signs that need to be replaced and made. And so we're going to try to get in the queue to get a sign put so that the soldiers of the Union, did you know that Iowa gave more sons per capita than any other state in the battle of the Civil War? Did you know Iowa was number one in sacrifice? Okay? Isn't that amazing? My son works in Iowa, and an Iowan came up to him one time and said, "How come y'all are all so proud of Texas?" And you know what his answer was? "Why aren't you proud of Iowa?" You know? And so, yeah, I'm all about remembering history, because if we don't remember history, it will get forgotten. This is a site that's about to be forgotten. Huh? Yeah, right, exactly. So anyway, that's the end of our presentation. Have you guys got any questions or comments or want more information? We're up here, you know, he's an historian, I'm a geologist, we just make it up. So thank you. Come on up here, man.
Any questions?
Any questions?
Hold on. Bill. Bill.
Why are we building in the middle of those old storm tracks on the island?
Roosevelt, establishment of the national seashore, the establishment of the Gulf and Atlantic and California national seashores were intended by the federal government to protect public access to the beaches. I'm not preaching to the.
Established to protect, the national seashores were instituted during the Roosevelt administration to guarantee access to the beach for the average citizen, because people buy beachfront property, whether they recognize the hazard or not. I like the lady on Sanibel Island in Florida who was whining on television, you know, my husband died and I moved down here to Sanibel Island here in Florida, and no one told me that a hurricane could hit. And you're like, yeah, and how much did you pay for that? Right? And the point is that people want their proximity to the beach. And so they think the construct of, and I'm going to pick on you guys, the construct of beachfront condos and stuff, you are buying in vulnerable areas. And so, especially at the edge of the natural passes are demonstrably geologically unstable over periods of time. So if you own a house near the water here, good on you. That's great, but just don't ask me to insure it.
And if any of you are interested, I brought 5 of the books that I published. They have more widespread interest than just Corpus Christi books. So if you're interested, stop by and I'll show you what we got, and I can take cash checks and credit cards.
That's great. And I'm not selling anything, you know, so yeah. No, really, his books, the books that he has co-authored and authored are fantastic about, I mean, they're the best source of history. This is, I don't know if you know this, but this is a history-rich region. And there's so much, I'm going to steal from my friend who's a professor down in the valley. We have so much history hiding in plain sight. And if you'll take a minute and turn the rock over or stop and read the sign, then there's an amazing amount of Texas and American history here in our South Texas region. You agree? I mean, it goes,
started here.
the Spanish exploration of Mexico started on these waters. And so the amount of history all the way back to 1519, this is an extremely rich place for history. All right. Anything else? Well, thank you guys. You've been a great audience. And we'll try to come up with something fun for next year if they let us back. And thank you so much.